Buonasera signori e signori, Deputy Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us at the British School of Rome. Carlos benvenuto a tutti all'Accademia Britannica. It's a really great pleasure for me to introduce the second event in Rome of our architecture program, Meeting Architecture, Architecture and Creative Process, curated by Reinier de Graaf. And it's a particular additional pleasure to be able to welcome Reinier de Graaf back to the British School at Rome after his lecture and show here, which was absolutely wonderful in 2011. And I would wish to also thank most warmly the Dutch Embassy for their support and assistance in bringing this event to the British School at Rome, and indeed also to London, since all of our events here are mirrored in London as well, which is it's the first time we've done this, and it's a very exciting initiative for the British School at Rome. I will pass on to others in a moment, but I did just want to say, in addition to thanking Marina for all her work on this, that it might be appropriate to mention that the British School of Rome, in addition to its Thriving Architecture programme, of course, has a Thriving Fine Arts programme. On Friday this week, we will be opening the mostra of our current award holders, artists and architects on Friday the 13th for an exhibition entitled Friday the 13th. I hope we'll see you all there from 6:30 onwards, and it will be a very great pleasure to be able to show you even more of the extraordinary creative environment which the British School at Rome is building at the moment with our friends and partners. And with that, I shall pass over to one of our friends and partners, to the Deputy Ambassador of Netherlands, Mr. Yusuf Klarenbeck. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much. Buonasera a tutti. Big thank you to Director Christopher Smith and Curator Marina Engel for once again presenting here one of the most interesting thinkers in Dutch architecture, Reinier de Graaf, Director of AMO, the celebrated think tank of the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, OMA. This adds just another chapter to our cooperation with the British School here in Rome, especially in the field of architecture. In the past couple of years, almost every year we've been able to support a lecture or an exhibition here at the BSR. And Reinier de Graaf, the director just mentioned it, was here himself 2 years ago, so welcome back to you. And also let me take this opportunity to compliment you with the opening of the Rotterdam building. Only just 2 weeks ago, this is where de Graaf was project director before becoming director of AMO. And for those who don't know it, the Rotterdam is the biggest multifunctional building in the Netherlands, opened just 2 weeks ago. And I would really recommend to check out the spectacular 3D video mapping video of the facade at the opening. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or Vimeo. Now, the lectures series this year is focused on meeting architecture, with a special focus on crossing boundaries between creative processes. And this fits extremely well in the approach that my government takes in supporting the creative industries. They do provide solutions and services, of course, but also they can be a source of inspiration to other sectors. And generating income on one hand, but also contributing to the well-being and social inclusion of citizens. So all in all, what we should seek to is to aim to combine these interdisciplinary knowledges within creative industries, unlocking the potential that one discipline could have to others. And here, Reinier de Graaf's work for AMO is a great example. Now, they prove that they are not only extremely relevant for architects, but thanks to their interdisciplinary approach, AMO also provides valuable input for decision makers, policy makers, and the like. If you take, for instance, Roadmap 2050, a practical guide to a prosperous, low-carbon Europe, which provides complete integration and synchronization of the European system of energy provision. Actually, in the a huge wallpaper based on this research as part of the energy exhibition at the Maxim Museum last year, which was another project that we were happy to support. And the other project I would like to mention is the exhibition on public works, the show on architecture by civil servants, presented at the Venezia Biennale, and which highlights the public building of the 60s and 70s of Western Europe. And in a sense, it was like a homage to those architects who worked anonymously for public departments and left us, even though with today's eyes, with pretty modern and innovative buildings. And this also was underlined by Mr. de Graaf himself in an interview, and I quote, when he described this natural relationship between architects and the public sector. I quote, as an architect, you have to mediate a lot of different interests and make them coalesce into a single project. And I think the public sector is faced with the same thing. There's an obligation to think holistically. It's present in architecture, and it's clearly also the responsibility of the public sector. So I think there's a natural bond between the two. Now, as a civil servant myself, and also as someone with an interest in architecture and the role it plays in society, I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much once again to the BSR, to Reinier de Graaf. I wish you most enjoyable, hopefully inspirational evening, and I'm happy to pass on to the serious bits of tonight. Thank you.
Buonasera, io sono Francesco Garofalo e mi è stato chiesto di introdurre questa lezione. Lo farò in italiano, anche se queste poche parole non saranno in grado di diciamo, anticipare, descrivere, introdurre o fornire delle chiavi di lettura del materiale, perché Reinier è diciamo, molto geloso del contenuto di questa conferenza. Però diciamo, io ho cercato di in parte intuirlo attraverso dei segni, diciamo, dei segni parziali. Reinier, per chiunque lo ha cercato anche su Wikipedia, diciamo, è nato nel 64, ha studiato all'Università Tecnica di Delft e poi al Berlage. Già dalla metà degli anni 90 ha assunto un ruolo importante all'interno di OMA. Come è già stato detto, è poi diventato il supervisore di AMO. C'è una frase che ritorna in discorsi che ho sentito, in testi che ho letto, su questa chiarificazione, diciamo. Qualche anno fa, anche a proposito di OMA, veniva sollevata la questione, diciamo, del rapporto con l'architettura. In fondo lo sdoppiamento ha permesso di semplificare questa nozione, riaffermando che OMA rimane interessata all'architettura, al progetto, diciamo, come se in fondo fosse necessario ribadire questo interesse al di là delle esplorazioni teoriche, culturali, intellettuali che il Rem, Colas e il gruppo, diciamo, che ha lavorato intorno a lui aveva attraversato. E così si dice di nuovo che OMA rimane interessata nell'architettura e nell'urbanistica. E un aspetto interessante è che la simbiosi di queste due strutture che si dividono i compiti è poi meno netta se vi impegnate a studiare gli elenchi dei progetti, e soprattutto se fate un passo ulteriore e andate a capire i nomi delle persone che ci lavorano, dove un'osmosi invece viene a venire. Ma diciamo, ciò che dovrebbe, che differenzia AMO non sono solo i committenti e non sono solo i campi nei quali opera, sempre, diciamo, ricavando le mie piccole informazioni da ciò che è documentato e documentabile, i media, la sociologia, la tecnologia, l'energia, il branding, la moda, l'editoria, la grafica. E credo che in questo aspetto stia proprio l'importanza, l'utilità, la specificità di questa lezione che Reinier terrà, e diciamo il suo valore secondo me importante dentro questo progetto curato da Marina Engel. Quindi anche il fatto che questa presentazione viene fatta direttamente da lui, diciamo, rispetto a una formula ricorrente e prevalente negli incontri del duetto, è giustificato dal fatto, secondo me, che potrebbe fornirci una chiave di lettura, alcuni strumenti, anche per altri incontri in fondo, in cui queste discipline, alcune di queste discipline, il modo di lavorare in architettura è fuori, in altri campi viene comparato. Quindi io mi dispongo, diciamo, a seguire questa conferenza alla ricerca di questi strumenti, di queste chiavi di lettura che ci torneranno utili. Della serie, penso che abbiate visto il programma e sapete, perché è stato anche ricordato, che non molto tempo fa abbiamo avuto la mostra e la conversazione tra Alan Caruso e Thomas Demand. Se permettete anche un minimo di e chi l'ha persa può anche leggere, diciamo, sul sito di Domus una mia recensione illustrata da belle immagini dell'allestimento. Tornando amo, diciamo, accanto a quelle parole che indicano diciamo, dei campi di interesse, diciamo, delle situazioni nelle quali, diciamo, si è cimentata a fornire delle risposte, a svolgere delle ricerche, diciamo, un termine anche questo che Reinier de Graaf ha molto, diciamo, cautelativamente circoscritto in alcune sue dichiarazioni pubbliche. Come molti voi sanno, l'Unione Europea, diciamo, un assortimento di entità vario come l'Unione Europea, Prada, gli Universal Studios, l'aeroporto di Schiphol, la Heineken, il Museo dell'Ermitage, l'IKEA, Condé Nast, l'Università di Harvard, eccetera, eccetera, e molti altri, che reagisce ulteriormente con quella serie di nomi. Dunque, perché questa introduzione sarà molto breve, se il punto di partenza sono le implicazioni del termine architettura fuori dal suo contesto disciplinare e la rilevanza, diciamo, di questo uso, le varie forme di questo uso verificate all'interno di progetti e di dialoghi di collaborazione, siamo, come dire, in una presentazione che diventa appunto lo specchio, un po' l'universo di molte delle altre cose che cercheremo di esplorare in questo programma. Ora, concludendo con una battuta, diciamo, l'impiego della terminologia associata all'architettura è qualcosa forse anche di interno all'architettura stessa, sollecita l'architettura stessa. Potremmo dire, concludendo, che nel discorso pubblico italiano questo spunto può essere senz'altro confermato, a condizione di conoscere però che il calcio viene prima dell'architettura come potenziale metaforico del discorso pubblico italiano. Dunque lascio subito la parola a Reinier de Graaf e vi invito ad accoglierlo con un caloroso applauso.
Thank you very much for that was my next question. Thank you very much, Francesco, for the kind introduction. I've prepared a talk especially for tonight, which I guess, if anything, is an ultimate attempt to take the theme of this program seriously. And I have tried. Including working my way through some of the prose that serves as a theme description. But thinking about it, I think the essence of the program is actually encapsulated, probably as far as the makers are concerned, in a single sentence. The nature of collaboration between architecture and some of the other creative processes. I would like to, in a way, reduce this definition one step further, I mean, to the point of risking being very trivial, to the word collaboration. What I've done for tonight is selected a few projects which I would not like to present as projects but as collaborations, and that is actually a very, very different thing from explaining projects. Another thing that I think is intriguing is that in the theme description the thing goes back, harks back to 1956. To the This Is Tomorrow exhibition at London Whitechapel Gallery. As part of the research for this talk, we've looked at that exhibition. Well, this is one of its products. It's an illustration by David Hamilton that in a way serves as the calling card for that exhibition. At least it does on Google today. The title is, "What is it that makes today's homes so appealing?" And I guess it's a kind of early Monty Python illustration, a collage, clearly, with the kind of appropriate ironic frowning on, let's say, what they consider bourgeois life at the time. But irrespective of this product, I think the most interesting thing of that exhibition is actually in its stated intentions. It is a plea for collaboration, but more than a plea for collaboration, it's a form of taking stock. It's a form of taking stock of the modern project that started at the beginning of the century, that so aggressively advocated collaboration, wanted to have the boundaries between disciplines dissolved in favor of a common goal, and then it's taking stock of the Britain at the time, which has far from achieved that. Art, architecture, and all the disciplines, essentially as products of the mind, think, to be enjoyed by all the senses. So I guess that is, all disciplines hark back, that they have the same common root as being products of the mind. This is another product of the exhibition. As I said, probably the validity isn't necessarily in the exhibition content, but rather in the stated intention. It equals a brain, of course, as is signaled here in an exhibition catalogue, which I think is very interesting that in 1956, an exhibition catalogue was actually a notebook that was spiral bound, rather than a 600-pager that is published by Taschen. Anyway, a brain. Some of the people that participated, Nigel Henderson, Eduardo Paolozzi, and of course, at the time, the Smithsons. But the group is larger, and what is interesting about the group is that it even is a group. It is an accumulation of unlikely characters, or at least characters that form a very, very unlikely combination. James Sterling, John McHale, Eduardo Paolozzi, St. John Wilson. So in that sense, a very, very interesting, the group composition, probably the most interesting proof of multidisciplinarity at the time. It is, however, a picture that is dominated by white males, and it has, let's say, a small minority of women. And in that sense, I think it's very much a product of its time. A time that spoke about cross-disciplinarity before there was globalization. How is that today? I think we're doing considerably better. I mean, at least there is more color to the faces, but I mean, women still get shortchanged, I guess, even in the composition here. I think this whole thing is no longer restricted to the arts or the creative discipline. If you look at an image of our office, which I guess could be any office today, it is the composition of its people that is the prime product of globalization, but the composition of the people, essentially from everywhere. I think we have 84 nationalities in our office at the latest counts. I think the Dutch constitute a 50% minority, a little bit like the locals in Dubai do. But what is more interesting than the presence of people with different professional and particularly cultural backgrounds is the fact that that in itself has the biggest impact on the creative process you can imagine. This is our office. Our office is essentially a permanent cultural clash. The office, although that may seem very, very different to the outside mostly, inside the office, this clash goes so far that it's ultimately unclear as to who the authors of our work are. This is a typical scene in our office, where, let's say, doubt and interrogation and the absence of a priori is is almost the most fundamental engine to the creative process. This is in a way the environment of our office. I guess the environment of our office equals that of a sweatshop. But I guess the sweatshop is currently simply the space in which creativity is acted out with all its connotations. This is a sweatshop, or at least it's an atelier of a random fashion brand, let's say G-Star, with whom we entered a relationship a couple of years ago. One of the first things that struck us, and also one of the first things that we highlighted in pitching, was the similarity between the environments from which, let's say, our products were produced, even though our products, buildings and jeans, are quite different. To the point that in a way we could produce a series of illustrations where architecture and fashion, our two work environments, simply morphed into a single, integrated, undistinguishable single space. This is the products of G-Star. They are rough. They're very grey. A lot of detail and ornament is eliminated, so that essentially the way the jeans are made becomes the ornament of the jeans. So the production process is the ornament. Something that in a way, given how much we like the structure of our buildings, also its physical appearance, is another thing we had in common, to the point that also that kind of hybridization could be imagined in the context of our products. This is a G-Star role. That was the manifesto that they have to describe what they are about. We replaced denim by architecture. We replaced G-Star by OMA. And one-on-one, we could actually adopt the manifesto of our client to be our own. In acquiring a job, this is quite an efficient tool. The whole mission of that fashion brand was that they wanted to consolidate their operations. They were in 5 different buildings across the city of Amsterdam. They wanted all their operations under a single roof, as indicated here. And that's what we went about to do. In a space reminiscent, let's say, of an airport hangar, we designed interior spaces, and we designed a bonus space, what we called a space on the perimeter of the building which could be open or closed, and when closed, actually the creative process could spill out into that space. A very interesting kind of double use between fashion production on the one hand, but also certain events where fashion was being shown could be done in an open-air situation in the summer, where actually the whole building is a kind of a display case to the neighboring city. A rendering of the final stages of the building. Again, a technique of rendering which actually came very, very close and is very, very much indebted to advertisement techniques used by the brand itself. Another angle of the building, a product actually for the billboard that served as an announcement of the building that's currently gone up, nearly finished. And this is the last image actually taken this morning. This particular type of collaboration, I think, is something that is unique to our office, where you could say that the engagements we have with clients is in a way very close to the teaching of this man. This man is called Lee Strasberg. He's the founder of the Actors Studio, and he's the man that invented method acting, which basically amounts to the fact that you are a better actor the more you identify with the character you're supposed to play, where actually an extreme form of identification can override any type of acting technique. He was the acting coach of people like Pacino and Brando, but interestingly also of Marilyn Monroe. And I guess he could have been the acting coach of somebody else. This is the next form of collaboration I would like to present. It is our long-standing relationship with the Italian fashion brand, again a fashion brand, Prada, where I guess the icon of that brand has, in terms of aura and in terms of cultural significance, simply moved beyond fashion to the point of actually being a representative of a certain zeitgeist. When we got involved with Prada, which is currently about 15 years, they wanted to expand quite aggressively globally, open a number of new stores in Japan and the United States, and also escalate the scale of their stores. Escalate the scale of their stores to a point that simply enlarging the sales area of their usual store would no longer suffice, but that stores became of a size that it became essential to simply reinterpret some of the sales area as other programs, so that the increase in size came with a certain amount of generosity and curation of a public program, if you wish. This is the first store we did in New York. It's a long, narrow, typical New York shop space, which we actually shaped as a single surface, as a single wallowing surface up and down. It's partially served as a display area, partially partially also actually served as an arena, because out of the whole wave, the stage could be folded, so that the shop is both sales area and event space at the same time. Now that notion of an event space, it takes place in a shop, which is, I guess, a building, I guess a permanent structure, but that whole notion has been taken one step further in another project. This is the Transformer in Seoul. It's essentially a very, very large tetrahedron steel structure, where each side is in a way a different shape and a different surface. And the whole thing of this building is that every now and then it can actually be turned on another side, so that one of the four plans that make up its sides actually become plans. So the facades become plans, the plans become facades, and you can do that 4 times. So that the whole thing actually can oscillate between a special event, a fashion exhibition, a cinema, or even an art exhibition. And when the building has no longer use, you can simply helicopter it away and put it somewhere else. That whole notion of temporality, again taken one step further in another project. This is the 24-hour museum in Paris, in the Palais d'Iéna, a collaboration with the Italian artist Francesco Vezzoli, where essentially the whole thing is a museum that exists only for 24 hours. So the museum is an event at the same time. And inhabiting this very big monumental space, and the museum is a museum of museums. That is the whole point. It has content, but at the same time it's supposed to simultaneously represent forms of museality in a way from the contemporary cage to the monumental kind of classic space. These are sculptures. These are sculptures of Francesco Vezzoli, which in a way are crossovers between eternal classical sculptures given the heads of contemporary divas, to, in a way, to put it in his words, emphasize the eternalness of femininity. And part of that whole building is also mainly public, of the part of museums that you never see, the secret, as they call it, the kind of art storage. The whole thing, as I said, was a 24-hour event that started with an opening dinner early in the evening, then turned into a disco club later in the evening to turn into a museum the next day and end up in a closing event after 24 hours. Another collaboration, which is actually an exhibition in Venice. When Attitudes Become Form, it's an exhibition curated together with Germano Salont and Thomas Lemont. It's essentially a reenactment of an earlier exhibition from 1969 in the Kunsthalle in Berlin, in Bern, to be in a fairly recent building, to be reenacted in a much older building in a more recent time. In Venice, the Prada Foundation building, where actually the exhibition isn't just showing the artworks of the earlier exhibition Bern, but it's actually also displaying the space in Bern, where in a way the building from Bern is transplanted on older building of 1724 in Venice to in a way become a kind of a joint superimposed set of spaces where simply two buildings are put on top of each other, where in a way the old, the Bern Kunsthalle is a series of plaster walls that simply interact with the real walls of the old palazzo to create a very, very curious space, which is partly classical, partly modern, and where also the whole artworks that were in there assume a completely different, well, they have the same relationship to each other, but they have a completely different relationship to the space that they are in, which kind of is an interesting thing to ask whether this is actually more museum or less museum, or whether the museum itself is an installation or a kind of an engineered experience. Mario Merz in 1969, Mario Merz in the Palazzo in 2013. That lives as a sign of the exhibition again in 2013. Our collaboration with Prada is very extensive, to the point that we do not just do buildings for them anymore. We've designed a great series of fashion shows. We have worked on their lookbooks. We have tried to work on their website a long time ago, and we've even at some point tried to design jointly a mobile phone with them. And as you can tell from this image, that is already quite some time ago. We have a vintage heavyweight by now. I would like to present another project, and this time it really is a project. In 1998, Universal Studios came to our office and they requested a building, a headquarters. At least that's what we thought they did. But interestingly enough, in a way what they wanted was us to think about their building as a form of organization, but a question where we actually had to think about their organization. The interesting thing was that I think in the years that we worked for them, the whole company changed hands. It came in as MCA, then was bought by Universal, which was again taken over by Vivenda. And the whole notion of what they wanted, the type of program or use they wanted in their building, changed so fast that almost no amount of physical architectural design could keep up with it. So this is what they wanted. This is how we translated it into a building. That building got aborted, because in the end it wasn't about a building. It was, the real question was an amalgamation between a film company and a liquor company and a media kind of empire. It was simply about the amalgamation of different types of companies in a single organization. The building never happened, but the building taught us a very important lesson. And that lesson is that whoever turns up on your doorstep with an architectural request these days may not necessarily want a building. And of course it is always in the ultimate self-interest of the architect to regard a building as the solution to any problems. Because, I mean, the more buildings, the more work, the more your company is secured. But nevertheless, the ulterior motive that is always embedded in that advice became very, very irritating. So, given this experience, which I guess is a failed project, we started to look at new opportunities. And we started to look whether architecture itself could have a new lease of life, not as a literal physical discipline, but as a metaphorical discipline. All these words, architect included, arena, blueprint, construct, platform, pantheon, they signify architectural elements. At the same time, they signify concepts. They signify metaphorical terms, often used in the modern discourse, to indicate forms of organization, the theater of operation, the framework of our events, the structure of our company, the facade of its media, etc., etc., etc. So I guess there are two types of architecture after globalization. One is literal, one is the type of architecture that you put beyond quotation mark. One which we continue happily to do with our firm called OMA. But for the other one, we thought it was necessary, particularly after that universal experience, to found a sister company which could take care of the hidden life or the kind of life of architecture that was generally outside the profession of architects. in a way, as a very aggressive way to reclaim a lost territory and to be involved in dialogues and debates that architects often can't. Real doing, act building, and in a way, the other one being the opposite, the antidote to almost all the classical properties of architecture. This is its mission statement. While everyone remains dedicated architectural thinking rather than architecture as the prime. I guess this prose is just about as lengthy as the initial theme description was here, but this architectural thinking is the term to take from it. Very important element of the founding of AMO is the fact that it has a very different relationship with clients, simply because it is involved far earlier in the process. And where essentially our architectural firm, in a way, remains connected to engineers and property developers, actually AMO, the sister company, could actually diversify that set of relationship to a much greater extent, to the point that the emergence of that sister company has in a way substantially enlarged our clients list. But more importantly than that, given the fact that they have a very different relationship with clients, clients also become a source of knowledge. Not only a source of requests that you have to fulfill, but also a set of partnerships from which you together progress knowledge in a whole series of debates where you could actually use the diversity of your client list to simply build up expertise in a whole realm of things which are traditionally considered alien to architecture. Collaboration was the term. And of course, the more partners you have, the more the stakes for collaboration are, the more collaborations you have, but also the more the stakes of collaborations are raised. And I don't know what it's like in English, but I know what it's like in Dutch. The word collaboration has a very double meaning, and it has a very negative double meaning. We use it in the Netherlands mostly to describe the attitude of the French in World War II. Which were not entirely as resistant to the Germans as they should have been. We probably do that to distract the attention from our own cowardly behavior during that same war. But anyway, collaboration has a very, very double meaning. And the arts, if you're very honest, including architecture, has also a very ambiguous track record when it comes to collaboration. This is Rodchenko. It's an army uniform, designed in the early stages of communism. Very beautiful, very modern, but clearly an agent of a particular regime. This is another type of fashion. Hugo Boss, the designer, well known today, but of course the designer of the German and the SS uniform. This is actually a modern graphic artist, which has actually produced a modern affiche poster against what they call degenerate music. That was part of a Nazi campaign and even an exhibition in 1938 where a whole range of arts were discredited as degenerate and alien to the prevailing ideology. I think it is quite interesting that I believe that the artist who drew this picture in the end also ended up being a victim of the regime a couple of years down the line. So in that sense, it is quite scary that in a way one of our first major commissions we had in the life of AMO was actually the European Union approaching us. They approached us to think about Brussels. To think about Brussels as the capital of Europe. And Europe is not a country. Europe, or the EU, is a transnational political system. How different is the capital of a political union to the capital of a country? How does it differ in terms of the symbolic needs it has? That was the question. Now, the EU doesn't have a very good track record in terms of making beautiful buildings, as is evident from this picture. I mean, beige marble, brown smoked glass. It's essentially a landscape of property development. It doesn't have a very good track record in art, kind of sexless virgins wielding Euro signs in a triumphalist mood. It labors all its points. Even though it has a single flag, it is necessary that their aesthetic works by accumulation. So this was at the time when we had our commission 15 members, 15 languages, signifying something as simple as the Parliament. This is an average photo shoot. Again, white males, very few women. This was before the 204 extension. This is after the 204 extension. And this is that same nameplate into Cyrillic script off the page. But there simply was a problem there. That if you talk about symbolism, if you talk about the conveying of a message, anything that works on the principle of everybody is fair share, everything that works on the principle of accumulation simply runs into trouble as they become more successful and bigger. So their own expansion was to the detriment of their symbolic impact. This is another product, something we made for an exhibition. This is called the Acquis Communautaire. It is a book. It doesn't exist as a book, it simply exists as a series of internet documents. It is the combined regulations that new member states have to comply to if they want to become a member of the European Union. We were the first one to ever print and bind that book. It is 90,000 pages, 6.5 meters long. A kind of beautiful monument to labor, I guess, and the labor that ultimately is bureaucracy. This is the flag carried by its leaders, but it's also, for instance, very interesting that flag is subject to the same type of bureaucracy. In the Charter of the European Union, the flag is described as a series of prescriptions in terms of the size of its stars, the exact blue of its color, and it's a completely regulated thing. So even the flag being regulated reinforces the prevailing prejudice that it's just about regulation and bureaucracy. This is a very powerful moment in history. You all know it. The Americans landing on the moon, where I guess the flag has a huge symbolic impact in terms of triumphalism, technological victory, the spirit, etc., etc., etc. Of course, the American flag is very multifunctional when it comes to that, and it can sort of compellingly convey any mixed message. But the moment Europe tries to do that, it sort of simply transpires into the opposite end, where it pushes in a kind of banality that also is devoid of the symbolic impact. McDonald's is not Europe. I mean, this image is fairly self-evident. And maybe it is because, it is simply because the unity that Europe tries to project is not right, is not true, and can also not be upheld. This is the image of Europe, but it's also what everyone fears. A kind of giant blue oil slick that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and when it gets bigger, it really erases national identities and cultural heritages. So this was our representation of Europe. It's similar in the sense that countries also disappear, but they do not disappear in favor of unity. They disappear in favor of a kind of unity in diversity, where here it's the regions that are represented, and the mosaic the grain of the mosaic gets so fine that the net effect of that is also a type of unity, but it's a type of unity that you could, imagine to emerge voluntarily. This was a symbol we found in the context of that exercise. It's a poster from 1948 for the German Marshall Fund, even before there was a European Union. Reinier, a Dutch graphic designer, where Europe is actually the ship propelled forward by sails, and the sails represent the countries. Now, the identity of the countries doesn't disappear. It is still there, but it is simply the working towards a common cause that they all do that makes the quality of this image. This is what, meanwhile, is left. The wind is gone. I guess so is the energy. But nevertheless, this became the root of a symbol that we made for Europe. A symbol going from Ireland to Greece at the time, going from west to east, where we progressively abstract the flags into a single symbol, the kind of barcode. We looked for applications. This was our spokesman, in front of a grey wall with a kind of socket, I think, behind his grey hair. But whatever this man would have to say, it would be infinitely more interesting if he would spoke in front of a European barcode. The barcode deals with another very important problem That's the problem of extension, because the barcode simply gets more beautiful the more countries join. In 2006, I believe it is, actually, so this was a symbol made in the contract of what was supposed to be a theoretical thinking exercise. But people caught wind of it. In 2006, the Austrian presidency adopted it as its symbol of its presidency. Of course, quite sneakily, they extended it to sort of feature and still turn it into something national. And on a state visit, actually, George Bush, and this is not Photoshop, unwittingly indicate also that Europe should be bigger. This was last summer. The EU got the Nobel Peace Prize. Most of the Dutch papers actually used our flag in the heading. So we retroactively could also claim credit for that short. This was essentially a brainstorm exercise, but it turned into a project. It turned into a project for an exhibition in Brussels that we made on behalf of the Dutch presidency in 2004. Very importantly, that project became a collaboration with a political scientist from England, Mark Leonard, currently in the Transatlantic Academy, then the Foreign Policy Centre, so a political scientist, a graphic artist, most known actually currently for projects he does in the favelas in Brazil, where he uses paint to, in a way, change the whole perception of the thing. And actually two curators, one journalist and one architect who have curated most recently the Guangzhou Biennale. So with that kind of odd combination of people, we embarked on that exercise. This was our site. The symbolic center of the European Quarter in Brussels, I mean a roundabout. And on that roundabout we imagined a space that was essentially the design of a circus tent in the colors of the barcode. These were our Italian collaborators that produced the circus tent, and there you go. Essentially a circus tent in the same shape as the colors of our flag. To be seen actually from quite a way in the city as an antidote to a lot of the classical buildings. And inside that circus tent was an exhibition. That exhibition was a kind of panoramic wallpaper wrapping around a circular space which was actually intended as a temporary meeting space for the European Commission, with a kind of Dr. Strangelove light bulb above the round table. In all modesty, inspired by the Sixtine Chapel. And there you go. That's a model, a first model, the 25 chairs, the round table with former commissions here, and the wallpaper that in a way was a journey across the history of Europe and the European Union. Shortly after the World War II, the inception, in the early days of the European Union, etc., etc. That became real. This is the executed version, actually the day before the opening. This is the day of the opening, with actually a very interesting contrast between the guests on the inside of the tent and the guests on the outside of the tent. It sort of coincided, I think, with an Iranian demonstration protesting that they were put on the list of terrorist nations of the European Union. But also here, I think there is a remarkable apt combination between actually this tent and the kind of political theatre that happens in the immediate vicinity. That's one thing. I would like to move to another collaboration, which, although it's about architecture, is actually equally political. This is the photographer we always work with. His name is Frans Barthesius, of Phosphor. He's a photographer, but I think in many ways, I think he has elevated the act of photography to a very, almost to an art. We had a project with him where throughout Europe we looked at buildings from the late 60s and early 70s in Europe, buildings from a time that is generally unpopular when it comes to architecture, And in a way we made a photographic record of those buildings. This is Pimlico School. The way it features in the Reba RBA archives. It's black and white, so then it's automatically architecture. This is a very, very recent state, but we also did that because a lot of these buildings are about to disappear. And this one did disappear. There's another one. This is a monument, the Faraday Memorial. It's actually an electricity house in London. It's still there. This is the former town hall near Waterloo by the same architect as Pimlico School. It's no longer there. But thank God there is a upside-down version of it in France, which is still left from a couple of years later. This is a school by Jacques Alice, another late 60s architect. Very, very beautiful early structuralist building in an extreme state of dilapidation, so it's probably not going to be long before that is gone as well. All these buildings have one thing in common. They have in common that they were all designed by architects who were never particularly famous and who'd never had an office of their own, who in a way did forego the whole idea of individual recognitions and worked for municipal departments as civil servants. At the time, municipal departments still erected buildings. Beautiful buildings in many cases, but in a kind of strange epoch of altruism, kind of architects that are considerably less known than their buildings. This is not quite the case today, as we know. The GLC, architecture department, I think at the top of its peak, counted about 3,000 architects. It was the hotspot for London architects to work. Its most notorious product is South Bank by Ron Harron and Warren Chalk, amongst others, who later went on to found Archie Graham. The South Bank Centre in London, currently about to be converted quite drastically. Again, from the original, from the opening, 1968, the RBA archives, the lobby, and this is what the lobby is today, actually Britain's most famous skateboarding rink. And I guess an interesting juxtaposition of let's say, the contemporary to the kind of late modern. I think there is a quote, "Fuck Cameron," but it's not in this picture. So this is in a way what, together with the photographer, we looked at a lot of these spaces, made panoramic photographs for a long time in a way trying to capture that space and turn that space into a wallpaper, which then essentially became the wallpaper of an exhibition we had in Venice for the Biennale of 2008 called Public Works, which was an homage to the architects that were civil servants that never had their own practice, where anyway we made a juxtaposition of archive material in black and white as foreground to a background of graffiti, which in a way was the current state of this building shown as archival material in the front. So the whole exhibition is a combination in a way between recessive foreground and prominent background. Also the space, because it was photographed panoramically, creates an illusion of perspectival extension of the space, a kind of trompe-l'œil, where you think the space actually continues, so that also the archive photographs that are stuck on the wall actually look like they are hovering in space. Some of the photographs really do. There's a series of books produced with ample photographic record of all those buildings. Combination again as it was in the summer of 2012, the thing. I would like to present one last collaboration. It is a collaboration we have built up with a school in Russia. The school is called Strelka, that is the Russian word for arrow. Essentially, the school was started by a Russian oligarch. A Russian oligarch that was very involved in media, both virtual and real. Live Journal, the internet publishing house, Rolling Stone, and has recently acquired, I think, Waterstones in England. But the interesting thing was that it's a school not just limited to architecture, it's a school for media, architecture and design. So it is in a way a school which is in a way the mirror image of what we tried to do with AMO 10 years earlier. So for us a huge opportunity. This is another website that the same person features on, but I guess this goes for simply every single Russian you would engage with would appear on the website. Anyway, the school, and this is a very, very bold claim, the school is intended to shape an agenda for Russia and in a way to train visionaries in the context of this agenda. It's very important that the school was started at the heydays of the previous president, who had different views from the current president. So, in a way, this is a particular scene of the school in a former chocolate factory along the river, with a courtyard that serves as a small arena for lectures. I guess this is one of the future visionaries. This is the kind of partly Russian, and whenever you translate Russian to English, it doesn't make that much sense. But anyway, I think a factory of visions, a factory of a kind of an aggressive futurology that I think, despite of some of the naivete that clings to these slogans, is nevertheless refreshing in the current day and age. You can always wonder. Clearly, history has proven that an overdose of ideology is very dangerous. But I think the current times, in many ways, prove that maybe an underdose of ideology is equally dangerous, and maybe more. So, I would like to show one project that we did in the school, which in a way took the mission of the school very, very seriously. That was a project that we did, which in a way was an analysis. And I guess it's kind of our version of This Is Tomorrow, because This Is Tomorrow, in reading up on the Whitechapel exhibition, the title is intended to refer to the tomorrow that was described at the beginning of the century. So This Is Tomorrow was in a way a form of stock-taking of an earlier vision. A history of predictions is that it does the same thing. It looks at predictions, but predictions from the past, with the present as a reality check, as a taking stock of what happened to those predictions. It's also interestingly cross-disciplinary, because predictions, for sure, do not belong to any professional domain whatsoever. They are in a way the shared desire of all professional domains. The shared desire is to know the future. So this is a fortune teller. This is a scientist. Clearly both interested in the future, but they have one thing in common. They both get it wrong. This is, I think, a change of date in the assessment of Judgment Day, I guess produced by Bible Belt American religious maniacs. But this is the Y2K, the millennium bug that essentially never happened in the year 2000, but nevertheless it had the combined CIA and American Defense Force up and running, doing 24-hour shifts to avert it. It never happened. Telephone has too many flaws to be seriously considered as a means of communication. Western Union, 1876. Clearly Western Union had an interest in saying that. Television won't last because people will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. 20th Century Fox, a film industry, clearly another vested interest in saying this. We do not like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out of fashion. There's grandpa recording studio refusing to sign up the Beatles. There is no reason why someone would want a computer in their house. Why would they? But then, these predictions are wrong, but then there is a number of predictions which are eerily correct. This is the newspad, resembling the iPad in The Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. Essentially fiction writing, but getting very, very close. Another fiction writer, Jules Verne. He's writing about Paris of the 20th century in the 18th century. By 1960, mindless attention to finance and science will have turned most women into cynical, ugly, neurotic careers. That's another from the same book. A geometric modern centerpiece will be built in front of the Louvre Museum. That is freaky. So, unexpected wrongs from unexpected corners and unexpected rights from unexpected corners. We, for the purpose of this studio, we spent the better part of the year building a website. Foresight and hindsight, what was the future of? And we analyzed literally thousands and thousands and thousands of predictions. Anything from the return of Christ to the bankruptcy of Freddie Mac, from actually the end of the world to the future of dishwashers. And we made a categorization of predictions. The planet, humanity, culture, technology, and the economy. That pretty much sums up every single subject you can make predictions about. We looked at the sources, prophecies, politicians, the arts, science, and business. And then we looked at the relation between them. You would expect that people would talk about things they supposedly know about. So therefore there is a one-to-one relation where actually the sources and the subjects, or sources make predictions about subjects of their supposed competence. The reality is very different. The reality is that predictions is the ultimate domain of promiscuity. Anything predicts anything about anything. So what we did was we built a matrix. A matrix of 25 squares, 5 by 5, and in a way registered all the predictions that we had found, some 300,000. A very interesting scattered pattern. I think the best tribute to multidisciplinarity one could ever think of. And we analyzed this. Now, true or false? That's the key question. So, the web contains a series of web pages which is essentially look like a Russian visa form that you can fill in with very important subject, field type, and the outcome true, false, or unknown, author, etc., etc. And we started to measure predictions, almost irrespective of the domain they came from. A kind of effort at almost Soviet standardization of something as ridiculously heterogeneous as predictions. The chairman, I think there's a world's market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM. Well, he's at Asimov. One day we will have computer outlets in every home hooked up to enormous language so you can ask any company and answers. A fiction writer, not a computer expert, somebody even not tied to the computer industry, actually predicts the internet here, and he is right. But it isn't always that binary. Horse-drawn coaches will be used in a tunnel under the English Channel. Now, the tunnel happened, we all know that, but to my knowledge, no horse-drawn coach has ever crossed it. So it's a prediction that is both true and false, and that goes for quite a few predictions. Then there is the category of the perpetually adjustable predictions, things that are meant to remain predictions. So the world will end before 400 AD. Well, it ends just a few times after that. Ends the alignment of the planets, 660 after the rise of Islam, 1656, nuclear holocaust in 1967, and another nuclear holocaust in 2003. So that is, to be determined. The return of Christ, 500 AD, also a few times and then, the strange thing is that the return of Christ is almost like the economic recovery of Greece. Not predicted quite as often, but in a state of perpetual adaptation. So we started to kind of look at the track record. This is about the economy of Greece. Let's look at the economy. This is all the predictions we collected about the economy. This is who's right, who's wrong. They're generally wrong, with the exception of prophets. So prophets are experts on the economy. It's quite interesting. We also then tracked the track record of sources. This is the political, simply always wrong. So never trust a politician, but I guess that is nothing new. And this is the whole matrix again. And what is interesting, where one would expect a pattern like this, where people who know what they talk about, prophecy about the planet, political about humanity, the arts about culture, science about technology, business about the economy, where you would actually expect disciplines to be right in their own field. This is the real pattern, which is almost a counterintuitive pattern that runs the other direction, which seems to kind of subvert the whole idea of knowledge. It seems to subvert the whole idea of specialization, because simply on this diagonal you get the least and you get the most accurate predictions from the most unexpected sources, which is a very compelling argument to listen, I guess, first and foremost, and to take the most unexpected sources very, very seriously, and maybe even the fortune teller herself in the end. Well, this is the website listed earlier, www.foresightandhindsight.com. It's live, it's active, people like Wikipedia can add predictions to it. It's being moderated, so it's a live, ongoing effort. I would like to end on something rather more serious. That is simply to ask everyone's attention for the next Biennale in 2014, which is curated, well, I guess not by us, but by Remco Hans, the founder of our office. It's called Fundamentals. It is, after this presentation, it is refreshingly about architecture. It is about the fundamental elements that have made up architecture for a long time and are far from dead. And it is also in the National Pavilions about how modern architecture actually acquired quite a local tradition still in many countries 100 years after its implementation. Thank you very much.
Ask a question or indeed make a prediction. Ci sono domande o interventi? Qualcuno che vuole dire qualcosa? Ah, sì, yes.
Your examples of collaboration. Somebody's thought there.
It's on.
It's on.
Sure. Your examples of collaboration are all to do with humankind. They're all to do with human culture. You've ignored the natural world. Your description of your projects barely feature a tree, and none of the trees are incorporated into the architecture at all.
Right.
What's wrong with trees? Are you frightened of them? What's wrong with trees?
No, there's nothing wrong with trees, but I mean they don't talk back.
Yeah, but that's why I like.
Yeah, but that's why it's hard to collaborate with them. I mean, I guess collaboration is an interactive process. I don't know how seriously to take your question, but let me try. Architecture is architecture, and landscape is landscape. I do not like architecture. I like the green cause. I like the green cause a lot. We've even done projects that I think are evidence that we take the green cause quite seriously. But I detest the kind of an architecture that tries to be green by looking green. I think that there is a whole wave in architecture where many architects pay lip service to the idea of being green by having green roofs, moss roofs, etc., and ignoring the fact that probably a lot of sustainability changes are made at another scale. I think probably architecture pays the greatest tribute to the green cause by being very compact, very effective, and very unwasteful. And this is generally I think what many of our buildings try to be. I'm sorry that there's not more trees, but this was essentially about people, which I think, given the way our presentations usually are, is already very unusual. Well, the next barrier will be broken.
Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
I would like to know if the link in between the research and designer, if the link in between the research and designer is parallel, or if you start before research and then design for each project, or if there is a method in between linking them and each other.
I find it always very difficult to answer whether there is a method. Because if there is one, I can't see it. But that's maybe because I'm in it. We do not have the luxury to do research before we do design. There simply isn't the time. The whole economic pressure, also on a firm like ours, is enormous. The time pressure is enormous. So I would probably even hesitate to call what we do research. I think it is a form of exacerbated curiosity and a kind of exacerbated cultivation of certain instincts, and then trying to put those instincts into words in a way to try and articulate what we actually do, so that we can later on hold our own products accountable to our own earlier articulations. But I mean, in terms of using the word research, I would even want to be extremely modest.
I think exacerbated curiosity is a very nice way of describing research myself. Okay, please. Si può passare il microfono.
I was stuck with what you were saying about Strelka, about the fact that even though it's understandable that we should stop using an overdose of ideology in our life, it's good that Strelka, for instance, a little bit more would help the cultural development of Moscow, for instance. And based on all you're saying about collaboration, you're not going to answer maybe, but maybe it's not even a good answer, but a good question. But you base your methodology and your poetic on the collaboration that you establish with random people. Could you possibly imagine if you would select the person you would collaborate with? Who would you pick? Like, I know that, but it's, could you use the little ideology that you need, that you say you would like, to pick a different collaborator from the one that you usually work with?
I don't think it's a point of ideology to pick anything. And I certainly don't think it's a point of ideology to pick your ideal collaborators. I think it is. I think our profession is an interesting test case, in a sense that we have academic ambitions, but we are entirely dependent on the free market to cultivate those ambitions. So we, in a way, are condemned to a state of perpetual improvisation, and trying to work with both the commissions that come our way, because we can't select, well, we can select a little, but I mean, ultimately, even firms like us cannot select that much. And the people that come your way, and I think it is, in retrospect, if I look at our work, I think the best things have actually arisen from unexpected collaborations, where we were not in a position to pick, not the commission, nor the client, nor the collaborator. And I think also the aesthetics of our work, in a way, are kind of tales of the unexpected, unlike certain other forms of architecture, that I'm not even sure if I would want to be in a position where I could pick a collaborator, apart from the fact that it's simply not a reality.
Right, one, and actually, if we go that way, the microphone's got less far to travel, and then gentlemen there.
Is there any subject of research that you will consider interesting, or maybe your office here in Rome?
I hesitate, because I mean, preservation is a very logical one, but I would probably say religion.
Yes.
To be done, but
You showed us the cross-disciplinary nature of our society that we are living, and I would like you to make a prediction for us about the role of architect in the future.
I think as technology progresses and as the construction of buildings gets professionalized, the development of the architect shows an interesting pattern. You build bigger and bigger buildings, and you know less and less about them in the real sense, to the point that you become an intruder in what is supposedly your own domain. Because for every decision, there are 4 specialists who know more what they're talking about than you, and they have hard numbers. But the architect almost never has hard numbers, and in this day and age, you always lose against hard numbers. And there are 2 ways forward, I think. Either you become such a specialist that your numbers will be their numbers. I don't know whether that's possible. Or you take a kind of revenge through the back door, where in a way, rather than becoming the nth specialist in a field already dominated by specialists, you become a generalist, where in a way your forte is that you can make the synthesis rather than excel in a particular corner. I mean, a little bit like the journalist, I guess, is.
Francesco.
I was looking in this presentation for certain tools to continue to explore the issue of collaboration in the next, and I found that very useful. But I also was reminded of a very limited moment in which I was in the position of the client, your firm, at the end of the 90s when I organized the competition for what is now the Maxi. And I want to expose a sort of dark side of what seems to be such a successful recipe in implementation, that sometimes this investigation, this questioning of the reality that seems to propose for the counterpart of the project additional meaning of other alternatives, more successful stories, kind of backfire to the project, because the ability to control this relationship sometimes sort of becomes problematic, because the people ask you the question get not the answer they expect, which is supposedly the way in which this should happen. But I remember at the time comparing the experience of the MoMA charrette with that of Rome and with that of other projects, and asking myself if in fact a more mundane acceptance of conventions in the dialogue of the collaboration would in fact be more fruitful for the result than the opening of the investigation as you raise.
Yeah, probably. I mean, in the 2 cases you mentioned, I think for sure that would have been the case, but I guess we cultivate a certain relative position vis-a-vis success as well. I mean, yes, it's an opening of Pandora's box also often, where you simply lose it, and I mean, they're not the only 2 cases that happens.
I just wanted to ask what does it mean, according to the new exhibition in Venice, fundamentals, the possible ultimate collaboration between Oma and Amo? Is this the something new step in this logic, or is it a kind of collapse of the 2, one inside the other?
I don't really know, because I mean, I'm simply sort of advertising the efforts of a dear colleague here. But I think it is not so strange that once you go outside the domain of architecture, even though you're practicing architecture in favor of, let's call it research then, that ultimately architecture itself becomes a subject of research, and you sort of take stock of your own things. And in that sense, I think it's probably the perfect case for collaboration, because then AMO, being architecture like that, takes stocks of architecture without the quotation mark. I think it's, you know, there's nothing wrong with architectural thinking about architecture. It's the ultimate tautological full cycle, I guess. And it's also the way it's taking place in the office, I have to say. It's mostly not the architects who are working on preparing what's being prepared.
The great determined effort of the architectural writer Vitruvius was to have architecture included in the concept of the encyclopedia, which was the perfect circle of knowledge, which is another reflection on architecture becoming research, research becoming architecture. In your description of what you thought architecture should be in relation to sustainability in the natural world, you said that it should be compact and it should not be wasteful. In a very short compass, with barely a wasted word, you've taken us through a whole range of projects and a whole range of different ways in which people have collaborated together. It's an extraordinary privilege for us to see so much architecture, so much thought, to have an invitation of this generosity to see into your practice. I'm sure you've exacerbated all our curiosities, for which we thank you, and I hope we shall all be seeing you in 2014 at the Venice Biennale. But before that, may we thank Reinier de Graaf most warmly for this splendid talk. Thank you so much.